Part 12. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 111. The first fire of Chu's new governor's appointment was extinguished before it was ignited. Local officials in Lingzhou breathed a sigh of relief and held a dust-washing banquet at Ziwixianglu, the most upscale restaurant in Lingzhou, to officially honor the governor. They wrapped up the entire Ziwixiang Tower. In addition to Lingzhou officials, they also stayed in Lingzhou. New candidates who did not rush to the capital were also invited. The candidates for state examinations are a huge resource. Through the Dear Ming banquet, local officials have forged inextricable connections with them. In the future, they can take care of each other in the officialdom. The Chu governor missed the Dear Ming banquet and saved it should be the idea of recovering as much as you can. Tang Ning had made an appointment to go for a run with Fang Xiaopang in the evening, but the plan was disrupted by Governor Chu's dust-cleaning banquet. She only hoped that the banquet would end soon, and maybe she would still have time to discuss with Zhongyi several ways to eat old yogurt. For the evening banquet, Tang Ning came with her father-in-law. She arrived neither too early nor too late. They had booked the entire restaurant, and many people were already seated on the first floor. Lingzhou has 240 new candidates for the state examination this time, about half of whom are students from Lingzhou. Among them, more than half left for the capital immediately after the state examination to prepare for next year's provincial examination. Today only about 20 people arrived. Master Zhong. Tang Jiwen. The governor of Chu has not arrived yet. Master Zhong will have to wait for a while. Tang Ning didn't know any of the people present today. The only people he knew, Su Qingyang and Zhang Yanzhong, were not here. They must have left for the capital. Tang Ning shook her head. There is no place to review. Going early is not as good as going there at the right time. Being fascinated by the colorful world of the capital, there is no intention to review. It is better to stay in Lingzhou quietly. In his mind, the current capital was completely different from before. The previous capital was his dream place for a happy family and a comeback. To him, the current capital was no less than a dragon's pool and a tiger's den. There were sworn enemies there, although he still didn't know that he and what kind of hatred does the other party have. He was far away in Lingzhou, and they didn't hesitate to send dead soldiers to kill him again and again, let alone the capital. Thinking that there was such a behemoth waiting for him in the capital, Tang Ning even thought about never going to the capital. But thinking about it carefully, although he did not want to provoke the other party, judging from the previous situation, it was obvious that the other party would not let him go, even if it was he is hiding in Lingzhou, and he is afraid that there will be countless troubles. Not only that, but it will also affect the people around him. For this reason alone, he had a reason to go to the capital. What's more, he also needs to find out the truth of the matter and know who is behind the scenes to avoid future troubles. Of course, the premise of all this is to put her own safety first. So far, Tang Ning has not found a foolproof method. With these thoughts in his mind, there was a sudden commotion at the door of the restaurant. Kuichenchi. Chen Sima. Tang Ning glanced towards the door and saw several people walking in from the door. The Chu governor was transferred to Lingzhou, so he was naturally not a polished commander. The assassination of an envoy last time affected not only Dong governor, but also several of his assistant officers, Ling governor, Sima, and others, who were all demoted. Feng Zhou. If this were not the case, the Chu envoy would not let go of the matter easily. This Kuichenchi was the confidant brought by the Chu governor from the capital. In front, an official looked at Kuichenchi and asked, "Master Kui, why didn't Chu governor come over?" Kuichenchi waved his hand and said, "The envoy from the capital is here, and the governor is accompanying him. Please wait a moment." An official was surprised and said, "The envoy from the capital is here, but what's the big deal?" Kuichenchi shook his head and said, "I don't know this." An official had already invited him to the front table and said with a smile, "Master Kui, please sit down first." The governor of Chu was not here, and Kui Chenchi was the leader of the officials here. After he sat down, he looked to the side and said, "Are these the new candidates for the state examination?" Exactly. A Lingzhou official smiled, waved to everyone, and said, "Why don't you come over and meet Kui Chenchi?" Everyone stood up one after another, bowed and said, "I have met Kui Chenchi." Tang Ning also stood up and casually cupped her hands in this direction. Kui Chenchi looked at everyone and asked, "The provincial examination is coming soon. Why haven't you gone to the capital to prepare early? Why are you still in Lingzhou?" A student at the front was a little confused when he asked, "Didn't they invite people like themselves here today? What does this mean?" Kui Ching was in the capital before. Although he was just a Qingshui yaman, he received a monthly salary and lived leisurely. It was not bad. In his lifetime, when Shang Guan retired or returned to the West, he might be able to take another step forward, and there would be no regrets in this life. It happened that at this time, the imperial court ordered him to come to Lingzhou to be a long-term historian. Not only was he busy with business, but he was also far away from the prosperous place of the capital. He was extremely dissatisfied, and everything here became unpleasant to him. Kui Ching looked at the student, frowned and said, "Although you are the candidates who stood out from the Lingzhou prefectural examination, you should not be proud or relaxed because of this. You must know that there are people outside the world, and there is a sky outside the world. How can the students of Chen State be so good? There are many students from the capital, and you are the best among them, not to mention the students from the Imperial College. Even if you, Lingzhou Jiwen, take part in the capital examination, you may not be able to rank first. The provincial examination is for each state. The students in the government are competing with each other, so you should study harder." As soon as Kui Chenchi came up, he first gave a lecture, which made all the students in Lingzhou lower their heads, and the local officials in Lingzhou were also disgraced. The capital is the capital of the Chen State. Most of the young talents of the Chen State gather in the capital, which is naturally not comparable to other state capitals. Beside Kui Ching, an official looked at him and suddenly asked, "If I remember correctly, the son of Kui Chenchi's family should also take part in the imperial examination this year, but I don't know what the result will be." "The kid is not talented," Kui Ching smiled and said, "he is only ranked 19th on the list of the capital Gongyuan." The Lingzhou officials and students present raised their eyes and looked at him. There was nothing untalented about Kui Chenchi's face. It was clearly full of pride and contempt. He just said that students from Lingzhou were not as good as those from the capital. Even Lingzhou Jiwen couldn't even make it to the top list when he took the exam for the capital. Now he said that his son was ranked 19th on the top list of the Gongyuan Academy of the capital. Isn't this right? Doesn't it mean that all the students in Lingzhou are not as good as his son? Although they were depressed, everyone chose to endure it. After all, although what Kui Chenchi said was unpleasant, what he said was true. The educational resources of the capital were indeed not comparable to those of Lingzhou. However, a state scholar in Lingzhou couldn't help it and said, "In the first test of Tang Jiwen's provincial examination, all the questions were answered correctly. In the second test, his poems were also the best among the others, winning the first prize from the two examiners and the rest the praise from his fellow examiners, and his third strategy made the three fellow examiners applaud at the same time. Such an outstanding person will definitely shine even in the capital." A smile appeared on Kui Ching's face and he said, "Such talents are rare in Lingzhou, but the capital is never short of talents." This time the capital's unification of Yuan dynasty was personally approved by the minister of Hubei, and even the two prime ministers, everyone praised him endlessly. "This is the real hero." That Suejin opened his mouth, but could no longer say anything. The minister of Hubei, plus the two prime ministers, weighed much more than all the examiners of the Lingzhou prefectural examination combined. Zhonmingli looked up at Kuichenchi, frowned, and a trace of dissatisfaction appeared on his face. At this moment, the sound of footsteps came from the door again. Kuiching immediately stood up and came forward, walked to the door, bowed and said, "Master Chu is here." However, Chu governor did not look at him. He glanced at the crowd and said, "Where is Tangning, the leader of Lingzhou Prefecture's trial?" Tangning raised her eyes, a look of surprise appeared on her face, and walked out of the crowd. Chu governor looked at him and asked, "Are you Tang Jiwen?" Tangning nodded, "Exactly." Two thin figures walked out from behind the governor of Chu. The one on the right cleared his throat and shouted in a high-pitched voice, "Lingzhou Prefecture is trying to solve the Yuan dynasty, and Tangning will receive the order." Wow! As soon as the word "receive the order" came out, the officials present were stunned for a moment, and their bodies shook. Those who had no time to stand up hurriedly stood up, adjusted their clothes, and knelt down on the ground. Even Kuiching and Kuichenchi had a look of confusion on their faces and then immediately knelt down. Before Tangning realized what was happening, her father-in-law pulled her to her knees. At this time, the eunuch's sharp voice was heard. "The imperial edict says, Tangning of Lingzhou, the leader of the Yuan dynasty, is knowledgeable and knowledgeable. He offers strategies to control floods and prevent epidemics. He relieves the suffering of all the people and relieves the worries of the country. He has won my heart. Therefore, I will reward you with a jade belt and 50 pieces of silk." This. Although Tangning lowered his head, he felt countless eyes focused on him from all directions. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 112. Tangning had only seen imperial edicts in novels and TV dramas before, and never thought that one day such a thing would happen to him. After the eunuch read the imperial edict, he looked at him and said with a smile, "Tang Jiwen, why don't you accept the edict quickly and kowtow to thank the emperor for his grace?" Zhonmingli touched him beside him, and Tangning came back to his senses, stood up and took the imperial edict, saying, "Thank your majesty." The eunuch glanced at him and didn't care whether he kowtowed or not. There were so many candidates in the state examination, and the emperor chose this one, which showed that he valued Tang Jiwen. Even if he didn't follow the etiquette of receiving the edict, they turned a blind eye and let it go. After Tangning received the edict, the people kneeling on the ground stood up one after another. At this moment, everyone looked at him with a very different look from before. The state examination Jiwen was nothing. There would be dozens of them in each imperial examination, but he was the only one who was awarded by the emperor himself in the state examination in all these years. What kind of heavenly grace is this? Even the governor of Chu looked at him with envy. He had been an official in the capital for more than 10 years, and he had never received any reward from His Majesty, let alone a jade belt that only the emperor's favorites could get. This jade belt is different from ordinary financial rewards. It is a symbol of identity and status. Even if he has no official position in the future, with this jade belt, he can be polite to officials and be allowed to sit in the court. This is something that can't be bought no matter how much money he spends. Kuiching, who was standing next to him, licked his lips and blushed. Just now, he said in front of the local officials of Lingzhou that Lingzhou had no one. Lingzhou students were not as good as those in the capital, and they could not even make the top list in the provincial examination in the capital. In a blink of an eye, he was slapped in the face by His Majesty's imperial edict. This is a jade belt. The capital is a place of outstanding people, but there has never been a precedent for a student to be awarded a jade belt by His Majesty. He only knew that this Lingzhou Jiwen had caused quite a stir in the court, but he didn't know that His Majesty actually valued and loved him so much. This is a treatment that no other talent in the capital has ever had, let alone his son who ranked 19th on the list. Kuiching lowered his head in shame. The governor of Chu looked at the two eunuchs and smiled, "You two eunuchs have come from afar, please take a seat." The two eunuchs who delivered the imperial edict did not refuse after traveling all the way, and nodded. One of them looked at Tang Ning and said, "Your Majesty has high hopes for Tang Jiwen. I hope Tang Jiwen will prepare well for the provincial examination and never let His Majesty down." Tang Ning bowed slightly and said, "I will do my best. After all, tonight is the Chu governor's dust reception banquet." After the two eunuchs read the imperial edict, the atmosphere of the banquet returned to normal. The governor of Chu and several others surrounded the two and walked away, and more people gathered around. "Congratulations, Brother Tang. Congratulations, Tang Jiwen. Lord Zhong has a good son-in-law. I am really envious." Everyone bowed and congratulated. Zhong Mingli stroked the short beard on his chin and looked at everyone with a smile. He glanced at Tang Ning, his eyes full of satisfaction. His good son-in-law never let him down in any occasion or in any matter. The governor of Chu invited Tang Ning to sit with them, but he politely refused. First, he had nothing to say to them, so it would be awkward to sit over there. Second, the imperial edict came unexpectedly. Could it be that Zhang Hao and his suggestions for the reform of the imperial examination system were really adopted? He was not overjoyed to be remembered by the emperor. Instead, he felt a little alert in his heart. As the saying goes, to be with the emperor is like to be with a tiger. As the saying goes, you can't touch the tiger's butt. In short, the emperor is ruthless. When you meet the emperor and the tiger, you should hide as far as you can. 50 pieces of silk are useless to him. They are just for Xiru, who needs them in her shop. They are rewards from the emperor. If they are sold, the price will double or triple, right? As for this white jade belt, although it is a bit heavy and impractical, it is rewarded by the emperor after all, and it is of extraordinary significance. It should be able to deter many villains and make some people dare not act rashly. It is not useless and cannot be sold. My father-in-law drank a lot of wine at night. He was drunk and was helped back by 2 constables. Naturally, he was severely scolded. After the scolding, my mother-in-law helped him back to the room and personally prepared sobering soup for him. She also planned to clear a room in the Zhong mansion to store the imperial edict. This thing is a rare commodity. My father-in-law was only appointed by the Ministry of Personnel. Even he had never seen the imperial edict of the emperor. Such a big thing must be publicized. When Tang Ning got up the next morning, he opened the gate and saw the maids gathered outside the gate, looking at him with curiosity. Qing'er was the most familiar with him, so she stepped forward and asked, "Sir, what does the imperial edict look like?" Tang Ning went back into the house, took out the imperial edict, handed it to her, and said, "Take it and have a look." Qing'er didn't have the courage to take it, so she leaned over to take a look, and then immediately said, "Sir, put it away quickly." Not only Qing'er and the others, Tang Yaoyao was also very interested in the imperial edict. However, when she took the imperial edict from Tang Ning's hand and read it over and over again, she curled her lips and said, "It's just a piece of cloth, but the words are written a little more beautifully." Ordinary people are always very curious about royal things, but in fact the imperial edict is just a piece of cloth used by the emperor. The emperor is also a human being, and he also has to eat and sleep. This is no different from ordinary people, and so does the imperial concubine and queen. It's not that you don't want to live in the world, but you still have to fart when your stomach is bloated. However, in the short term, what Tang Ning should be worried about is not whether the emperor's concubine farts or not, but himself. He could not avoid this trip to the capital no matter what. Whether it was subjective or objective, he had reasons why he had to go. But the capital is not as good as Lingzhou. Tang Yaoyao and Peng Chen can't stay with him all the time. Peng Chen can. After all, the police officers are only temporary workers and are not part of the establishment. But this time when they go to the capital, they don't know what they will encounter. What, just one Peng Chen is not enough. What he needs is a strong backing that can relieve him of most of his worries. Now it has entered late November, and the provincial examination is scheduled for the 9th day of March. He will leave for the capital as soon as the Lantern Festival is over at the latest, and there is not much time left for him. When passing by his third uncle's shop, he saw the old beggar again. There was a wine gourd hanging on the old beggar's waist. It was dangling as he walked around. It should be empty. He grabbed a man in gorgeous clothes on the street, stared at him, and said in a deep voice, "I see that your hull is black and your blood is rushing to the top. This is a bad sign. There will be a bloody disaster in the near future. I have a refuge here. The solution to disaster only costs 1 tael of silver. Roll." The man kicked him and kicked him far away. The old beggar patted his chest, got up from the ground, and muttered, "If you don't believe it, don't believe it. Why are you beating someone?" In Lingzhou City, there are many fortune tellers on the streets, but they are either dressed in clean green clothes or Taoist robes, with fluttering white beards and fairy-like spirits. They look like that, with clothes like his. The ragged beggar, full of sour odor, just stood up, and the word liar was written on his face. Ouch! Tang Ning was thinking this when she suddenly heard a cry of pain coming from the front. He raised his head and saw the man lying on the ground with a broken forehead. He pointed at a vendor pushing a cart on the street and said angrily, "You don't have eyesight when you walk." Not to be outdone, the hawker put one hand on his hip and cursed, "Who is not smart? I pushed the cart hard and you bumped into me. If there hadn't been a hole in the ground. I don't care, I fell down, you have to pay for it." The two quarreled on the street. Tang Ning was stunned and looked at the old beggar, who also looked at him. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Young man, I'll watch your yintang. Here, take it to buy some wine." Tang Ning casually threw a piece of silver. She didn't know whether the old beggar was a martial arts master, but Crow-Mouth had already reached an extremely advanced level. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 113. Young man, you are such a good person. The old beggar took the piece of silver, looked at Tang Ning, and said seriously, "Good people are rewarded, and the gods will bless you." After saying that, she clutched the broken piece of silver tightly, as if she was worried that Tang Ning would regret it, and immediately turned around and left, striding towards a wine shop not far away. Tang Ning shook his head, sat in front of his third uncle's shop, and asked Jiao to help him get a bowl of yogurt. When he picked up the spoon, he saw Butcher Zheng's daughter Nanan standing next to him, looking at him eagerly. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Want to eat?" The little girl nodded, shook her head, and turned to look at Butcher Zheng in the shop next to her. Tang Ning handed her the bowl of yogurt and said, "Eat it." "Thank you, brother." The little girl picked up the spoon and ate it in small bites. Tang Ning took another bowl of yogurt, turned to look at Butcher Zheng, and asked casually, "Senior, is the new knife still good to use?" "Easy to use, easy to use." Butcher Zheng looked at him and said with a smile, "I am just a butcher of pigs and sells meat. Don't call me senior." Although he said this, Tang Ning knew very well that this butcher selling meat on the street was a true martial arts senior. He asked Li Tianlan that the assassin who escaped on the long street that day was already top-notch in martial arts. With an ordinary butcher knife, he could kill the top assassin with one blow and leave one of his arms behind. Belongs to the lonely type of master. If Peng Chen had the strength of Butcher Zheng, Tang Ning wouldn't have to worry so much now. It's a pity that Senior Zheng seemed unwilling to talk about those things. If Tang Ning mentioned it again, it would only offend people. She stopped continuing the topic and concentrated on eating his yogurt. The old beggar quickly walked out of the wine shop. The piece of silver was enough to fill his wine gourd. He leaned against the corner, opened the wine gourd, took a sip, and then narrowed his eyes with an expression of enjoyment on his face. After a long time, he smacked his lips and took out a broken bowl from his arms. After pouring half of the bowl of wine, he motioned to Tang Ning and said, "Young man, would you like a bowl?" Tang Ning shook his head. He didn't drink alcohol before. After coming here, he tasted the wine here. The alcohol content was not high, but the taste was pretty good. It could be drank as a drink. Of course, the reason why he doesn't drink now is that the bowl the old beggar holds the wine in is extremely dirty, and he is the only one who doesn't dislike himself. The old beggar drank all the wine in the bowl and sighed, "Young man, you don't understand wine yet. When you are a few decades older, you will know how good wine is." This old beggar really loves wine as much as his life. He has nothing to do. Tang Ning looked at him and asked casually, "Does this old man know a lot about wine?" "Remove that." The old beggar glanced at him and said disdainfully, "I haven't drunk any wine there. I drank all the wine from your Chen country decades ago, and the nectar white wine from Lingzhou, the capital's 1,000 days drunk, is considered to be the best wine, and the royal palace's royal wine is better than them, but this thing is difficult to make and takes too much effort." When talking about this topic, the old beggar obviously became interested and kept talking. "The wine in Chu State is average, there is no top quality wine. I don't want to mention the others. When it comes to the best wine, I still think that Lianguo's bamboo leaf green is the strongest and mellowest. That is the wine that men should drink. After one sip, it is like poison entering the throat is burning, and the intestines in the abdomen are pierced and rotten. But it has an endless aftertaste." Having said this, he sighed, with a sad look on his face, and sighed, "It's a pity that the Liang kingdom has been destroyed for nearly 10 years. From then on, there will be no more green bamboo leaves in the world. Drinking alcohol makes your throat burn and your intestines pierce and rotten. In this world, it should be regarded as the best wine. Due to the craftsmanship, the alcohol content here is generally not high, which is why there are so many wine masters who claim that they will not get drunk after 1,000 cups. If replaced by high-strength liquor of later generations, 1,000 cups will not only make you drunk, but also cause gastric perforation. Distilling high-strength wine is almost a necessary skill for every time traveler to return to ancient times. However, in fact, the simply distilled wine is strong enough, but it lacks the mellow aroma that real wine should have, and is far from the level of fine wine. When it comes to drinking, Tang Ning may not be as good as the old beggar, but when it comes to understanding wine, even if he lives for hundreds of years, he won't be able to compare to Tang Ning. During the work-study program, he did almost everything. During the hottest summer months, he would wear a puppet as tall as one person and stand on the street handing out leaflets. He worked as a tutor, worked at KFC, and made cosmetics. Sales, liquor sales, are no longer familiar with the types of liquor, brewing methods, and their respective characteristics. He didn't know what the old beggar said was true or false, and he listened absent-mindedly. Whether it was Ganlubai or Kinrazwai, he was not interested in it. In order for the beggar gang to develop and grow, and to become formal, it would take a lot for money. Maybe you can consider improving the brewing process and try to brew some of the famous wines of later generations. He can't handle this matter by himself. The Tang family seems to have opened a wine shop, and the wealth will not go to outsiders. How about discussing it with Tang Yaoyao? I'm telling you, this green bamboo leaf. The old beggar spat as he spoke. When he raised his eyes, he saw Tang Ning's eyes wandering and looking distracted. He frowned and said, "Boy, you don't believe me." From the fact that his address to Tang Ning changed from young man to boy, it was clear that he was really dissatisfied. Tang Ning came back to her senses, shook her head and said, "It's not that I don't believe it, it's just that I think it's a bit inappropriate to distinguish fine wines by region and name. I wonder if seniors have ever heard of another way of distinguishing wines. The old beggar looked at him and said, please tell me. Fine wines are distinguished by region or name, rather than by aroma. The aroma is sweet, full-bodied, harmonious in aroma, long in the aftertaste, and fragrant in aromas. Elegant and delicate, the wine is rich and mellow, fragrant but not bright, low but not light, it is a sauce flavor type. The cellar aroma is rich, sweet, with a clean and long tail. It is a strong aroma type. The fragrance is mellow, sweet, and soft, the aftertaste is refreshing, sweet and refreshing, it is a light fragrance type. You said so much. The old beggar listened to him in a daze, licked his lips, looked at him, and said, I didn't understand a word of it. He shook his head, with a look of disbelief on his face, and said, you scholars are the best at making up stories. I have lived in liquor country for many years, and I have never heard what you said. I've never heard of it. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, forget it if you haven't heard of it. Old man, please continue drinking. I have something else to do and I'll leave first. The old beggar was about to argue with him, but he didn't expect him to leave immediately. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately said, wait a minute. Tang Ning turned around and the old beggar looked at him and said, do you have any evidence for what you just said? No. Tang Ning shook her head and said, just say it casually, old man, don't take it seriously. How can you just joke about this kind of thing? The old beggar frowned and looked at him, his face turned solemn, and said, I don't believe it. You, a young boy who is still young, can actually know more about wine than me. He took out a yellowed book from his arms and said, the few secret books I sold you last time are just fragments. Add this one to the whole book. You can't practice with the fragments alone in the highest depths. If you can bring out those fine wines you mentioned, I will give this book to you as well. Tang Ning looked at him with wide eyes and said angrily, you didn't say it was a broken copy at the time. I didn't say it wasn't a broken copy. The old beggar looked at him, waved his hand and said, but don't worry, although the secret book is incomplete, there is no harm in practicing it. It's just that you can't practice it to the peak. Wait for you to get it. How about using the full volume to unleash their full power? Tang Ning originally thought that although the old beggar was sloppy and full of lies, he was at least honest in doing business, but now her view of him has changed. He stared at the old beggar and said suspiciously, are those dual cultivation secret books also incomplete or fake? Fart, that's a serious sexual intercourse technique. The old beggar looked at him, puffed his beard, glared, and said angrily, you are a charlatan. Tang Ning nodded. Judging from what he did, he was indeed a charlatan. The old beggar looked him up and down, and suddenly said, whether that double cultivation secret book is true or false, it shouldn't make much difference to you, right? Tang Ning looked at him and asked, what do you mean? You are still a child, and your yang has not disappeared, right? The old beggar's eyes seemed to be filled with amusement, and he tsked, your wife is so beautiful, and you have been married for so long, and yet you are still a child, isn't it impossible for you? Tang Ning turned around quickly and strode away. The old beggar waved to him and shouted, don't leave. I also have a kidney strengthening technique here. I can sell it to you cheaply. It only costs 10 taels of silver. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 114. Tang Ning turned around and saw Tang Yao Yao standing not far away, looking at him in surprise. When he walked back, Tang Yao Yao followed him. The old guy's eyes are so poisonous. He only knows that some people can tell whether a woman is a Yunying by looking at her face. Who would have thought that there is such a pervert who can see through men? In addition to selling martial arts secrets and erotic picture albums, he actually also knows how to strengthen the kidneys. What else does he not understand? Although there is nothing wrong with his kidneys, it is still okay to take a supplement to strengthen the kidneys. I will ask about it next time. When he was about to reach Zhong Mansion, Tang Yaoyao finally couldn't help it, turned to look at him and asked, "Is what the old beggar said true?" "What really?" "It was about her best friend's happiness." Tang Yaoyao thought about it and said, If you really can't do it, I still have a lot of tonics at home." This was not the first time that Fairy Tang had doubted him. Shike could not be humiliated, let alone humiliated again and again. Tang Ning looked at her, gritted her teeth and said, "Do you want to try?" "What did you say?" As soon as he finished speaking, Tang Yaoyao had already grabbed him and looked at him from behind with shame. Tang Ning had decided that when he got the complete version of the secret book from the old beggar, he would practice secretly by himself and never tell Fairy Tang. Next time, he would be the one standing behind to take her down. Cough. A heavy coughing sound came from behind them. Tang Ning looked back and saw a middle-aged man standing at the door of Tang Mansion. Seeing the middle-aged man, Tang Yaoyao immediately let go of him and said in a panic, "Dad." Rich man Tang glanced at Tang Ning, looked at Tang Yaoyao, and whispered, "Come back with me, I have something to say to you." Tang Yaoyao gave Tang Ning a very subtle look, then she stretched out her long legs and followed rich man Tang back to Tang's house. Tang Ning moved her shoulders. Tang Yejing would attack whenever she disagreed. Whoever she married in the future would be unlucky. Once there was a family conflict, someone might die. Tang Mansion. Rich man Tang looked at Tang Yaoyao and frowned, "How unbecoming is it for a girl like you to touch other men in broad daylight?" Tang Yaoyao lowered her head and whispered, "Who did something?" Rich man Tang looked at him, shook his head with some regret, and said, "You and Xiao Yi grew up together, why can't you learn from her? Look at Xiao Yi, who is proficient in all kinds of music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, but you know how to dance with guns and sticks. You are a few months older than others. They are already married. Your marriage is not even settled. All the matchmakers in the city are not willing to come to my Tang family for matchmaking." Tang Yaoyao curled her lips and said, "If you don't come, I won't come. I'm not willing to get married yet. In 2 years, you will be 18." Rich man Tang looked at her and said, "I think this marriage must be finalized as soon as possible. If it is delayed any longer, it will be even more troublesome. I will ask some matchmakers to help me first. You look for it, and you make your choice when the time comes. I won't marry anyone if I want to marry you." Tang Yaoyao stamped her feet and ran out quickly. Tang Keshan looked at her leaving figure, pointed out her finger, and finally could only sigh, with a trace of helplessness on his face, shook his head and left. Tang Ning squatted in the yard, tinkering with a few bamboos in her hands. He was going to distill some wine with a higher alcohol content. He didn't have a glass tube, so he had to use bamboo instead, hoping it wouldn't affect the taste too much. Naturally, the wine obtained by this method cannot be called fine wine, but it doesn't matter. He is not trying to sell it for money, he just wants to exchange it for the complete secret book from the old beggar. The evil-minded old guy actually saved a trick last time. What if Tang Yejing practices according to the broken book, and problems arise due to him? Although the seriously brewed high-altitude wine tastes better and mellower, it is too troublesome and time-consuming, and Tang Ning does not know the complete process. Anyway, it is just to fool an old beggar who has never seen much of the world, which is about it. Tang Yaoyao sat on the wall, looked at him with a very decadent expression, and asked, "What are you doing?" Tang Ning did not answer, but looked at her and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Tang Yejing was only 281 years old, an age when she was full of vitality and invincible in youth. If she hadn't encountered something really annoying, she wouldn't have been so decadent. Tang Yaoyao jumped down from the wall, sighed, and said, "My father is looking for someone to help me as a matchmaker." It turned out that she was worried about this matter. Tang Ning finally understood what it meant to be unfounded. In the entire Lingzhou, who doesn't know that the Tang dynasty woman Bo Yuntian has unparalleled martial arts skills, can kill wolves with one hand, and tear tigers and leopards alive? Who dares to marry her after eating a bear's heart and a leopard? Tang Ning looked at her and comforted her, "Don't worry, he won't be able to find it for a while." Tang Yao Yao nodded, then her expression was stunned again. She looked at Tang Ning and said angrily, "What do you mean?" "What I mean is..." Tang Ning looked at her and said seriously, "A person is as good as he is, free and carefree. You are still young and your father is too anxious. Go back and talk to him. Say, he will definitely agree." Tang Yao Yao looked at him with a slight resentment and said, "It's all your fault and Xiao's. If you hadn't gotten married so early, my father wouldn't have forced me." Tang Ning looked at her but said nothing. If her hydrangea hadn't hit him, he wouldn't have appeared in the Zhong mansion, and rich man Tang wouldn't have been stimulated to worry that his daughter wouldn't be able to get married, so naturally he wouldn't have found someone to match her. So after all, she herself is the culprit of her current depression. However, Fairy Tang would not admit this. At this time, Tang Ning would not choose to reason with her. "Anyway, don't worry. There's no point in worrying about your father. It's not up to you to decide whether to marry or not." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "If you have nothing to do, come over and help." Tang Yejing is not an ordinary woman. Such things as forced marriage do not exist for her. She is really forced to run away from home and wander around the world. She can do it. He was about to fasten several bamboo tubes together. Tang Yeji held one for him and asked absently, "Do you men all like women like Xiao Yi and Xiao are you?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "That's not necessarily the case. Everyone has their own preferences. Some people like gentle and virtuous people, some people like unruly and wild people. Of course, almost everyone likes beautiful people." Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and asked, "Are you men so superficial?" "Not all." Tang Ning put the two bamboo tubes together and said casually, "I think appearance is not important, the key is to like it." Tang Yao Yao looked at him with interest and asked, "What do you like?" "I like to be pretty." Tang Ning tied up a few bamboo tubes, then looked at her and said, "Don't be discouraged, people always have their own character. Although you are not as sensible as Xiao are you, not as gentle as Xiao Yi, not as cute as Qing and not as cute as Xinyu. You are young, but your martial arts skills and loyalty are still very admirable. Who wants you to appreciate it?" Tang Yao Yao glared at him as if looking at an enemy and walked out angrily. Tang Ning shook her head and walked into the kitchen with the packed bamboo tube. "Everyone's personality is different. Why should you envy others? Just insist on being yourself." Fairy Tang envied Zhongyi for having so many people admire her. Tang Ning also envied her long legs and rich wealth. People just don't know how to be satisfied. They only focus on the advantages of others, but cannot see their own advantages. I don't know how many women in Lingzhou hope to have a pair of long legs like hers. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 115. Tang Ning was carrying a small wine jar. When he came to the shop, he didn't see the old beggar in the corner. He didn't know where he went to cheat for wine again. The distillation equipment was unprofessional, the temperature control was not good, and the efficiency was very poor. It took him 2 days to make such a small half jar of strong wine. He tasted it before coming. There was almost no taste except spicy. He didn't know if the old beggar would be fooled. He passed by the butcher's door. Zheng the butcher, who was chopping meat, put down his knife, sniffed, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "What's the smell?" Tang Ning paused and raised the wine jar in his hand. These martial arts masters have noses like dogs. They can smell the wine jar with a cork. A martial arts low-level person like Tang Yejing doesn't have this ability. Butcher Zheng took a deep breath, strode out, pulled out the stopper from the jar, took a deep breath, and suddenly his eyes lit up. He exclaimed, "Good wine." Tang Ning handed the jar over and asked tentatively, "Want a sip?" Butcher Zheng was not polite to him. He took the jar, raised his head, and took a sip. A blush appeared on his face. After a while, he wiped his mouth and praised again, "It's strong enough. It's strong enough, but it's far from being a good wine. If what he made casually is considered a good wine, then what is brewed according to normal technology is not a good wine." Butcher Zheng smiled and raised his head again to drink. Seeing this, Tang Ning thought to himself that he was in trouble. The jar was small to begin with, and there was only half of it. He had almost drunk more than half of it in the last sip. If he took another sip, what would he use to exchange for the secret book of strengthening the kidney? "Shut up." At this moment, an angry voice suddenly came from the front. Tang Ning turned his head and saw the old beggar running quickly from a distance. He snatched the wine jar from Zheng the butcher, put it to his mouth, tilted his head and drank it, but only a few drops of wine dripped from the jar. The old beggar shook it vigorously, and another drop dripped. He put the mouth of the jar to his nose, took a deep breath, and then his eyes flashed with strangeness. Then he smashed the jar suddenly, looked at Zheng the butcher with bloodshot eyes, and said angrily, "Pig butcher, you are so arrogant just because you know a few tricks of farming. You dare to touch my wine." A bright butcher knife was placed on his neck. "Brother Zheng, put down the knife first, and we can talk it out." The old beggar looked at him solemnly and said sincerely, "Isn't it just a jar of wine? We all live under the same roof. We will see each other when we look up. Don't hurt the harmony." Zheng the butcher had no expression on his face, and the butcher knife in his hand was still placed on his neck. The old beggar laughed dryly, looked at Tang Ning expectantly, and asked, "I can smell the smell from a long distance. Do you still have the wine just now? Just one jar, and the complete secret book will be yours." Tang Ning shook his head and said, "That's all I have." The old beggar closed his eyes, his chest heaving a little. When he opened his eyes and looked at Zheng the butcher again, he sighed and said, "Pig butcher, you are too much. A jar of wine, you didn't even leave me a mouthful." Tang Ning's eyes blurred, and the butcher knife in Zheng the butcher's hand appeared in the old beggar's hand. The old beggar put the knife on Zheng the butcher's neck, looked at him and said, "I tell you, pig butcher, this matter today cannot be resolved without 100 taels of silver." Tang Ning looked at the scene, pursed his lips, and said, "Although there is no now, but give me a few days, I can still get another jar." The old beggar's eyes lit up, "Really?" Tang Ning nodded, "Really." The old beggar took out a pen from his arms. Wang's booklet was stuffed into his hand, and he said, "The tricks missing from those secret books are all on it. Pay first and then receive the goods." The old beggar was so straightforward that it was unbelievable. Tang Ning showed a trace of doubt on his face and said, "How do I know whether it is true or false?" The old beggar waved his hand and said, "You can ask the butcher. He knows more than just butchering pigs." "Forget it, I'll trust you once." Tang Ning shook his head, thought about it, and said, "I'll give you half a jar, or you can give me the other one." "Which one?" "The one for strengthening the kidneys." There was no 100 taels of silver. The old beggar only extorted a piece of silver and a tael of pig head meat from Zheng the butcher. Zheng the butcher took out a broom from the shop and said while sweeping the broken pieces of the wine jar on the ground, "The old guy has countless good things. You have to seize the opportunity and cheat as much as you can. This is obviously an exchange, something that both parties are willing to do. How can it be called cheating?" Thinking of the scene where he just snatched the knife, Tang Ning looked at Zheng the butcher and asked, "How powerful is his martial arts?" Zheng the butcher swept the fragments to the garbage pile in the corner and said, "Very powerful." Old Zheng was already the most powerful person Tang Ning knew. He was very skilled in using a butcher knife. Tang Ning didn't even see how he put the knife on the old beggar's neck. But he didn't see how the old beggar snatched the knife and fought back. In this case, the old beggar was more powerful than him. If he had such a bodyguard, wouldn't he not have to worry about his own safety when he went to the capital? It's not enough to just want his treasure secret book, but also want him. Fortunately, the old beggar has never seen the world and has never drunk real good wine. He can just buy a few jars of wine on the street and steam it twice. However, it is best to get some good wine that has been brewed through a complete process, so that he can keep this drunken old guy. But this would take at least a year, and Tang Ning only knew a rough idea of the brewing process. Without the help of professionals, he would not be able to make it himself. When he returned to his yard, he saw Tang Yao Yao sitting at the stone table in a daze. Tang Ning took out a secret book from her arms and handed it over, saying, "The old beggar didn't sell all the secret books last time. Take this one. All the missing moves are in it." Tang Yao Yao reached out to take it, flipped through it casually, and said, "The kidney is the foundation of innateness." Tang Ning snatched the book from her hand, handed the other one to her, and said, "You got the wrong one, this one is the right one." Tang Yao Yao flipped it over casually and threw it aside. Tang Ning asked in surprise, "What's wrong? Is this fake?" Tang Yao Yao shook her head and said, "It should be true. I felt that there was something missing in those secret books before. Some of the moves were not coherent. Now I feel much better." If it was true, why did she still look like she was beaten by frost? She has always been very active in practicing martial arts, and she is still bitter about the fact that she is not Li Tianlan's opponent. She should never have this expression when she sees the missing secret book being completed. Tang Ning waved her hand in front of her eyes and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Tang Yao Yao looked away and said a little decadently, "This morning, several people came to my house to propose marriage. A true warrior dares to face the bleak life, dares to face the dripping blood, and dares to propose marriage to the Tang family. Unexpectedly, there were so many warriors in Lingzhou. Tang Ning guessed that there was an 80% chance that they were interested in the Tang family's money. After all, there are few people in this area who appreciate her unique personality just like him." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Did your father agree?" Tang Yao Yao shook her head and said, "No, he asked me to choose, but I didn't choose and ran out." Tang Ning had no relatives in her previous life and had never experienced what it was like to be forced into marriage. In this life, her wife was given as a gift and she had never experienced it. There was nothing she could do to help her. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said seriously, "We are friends, you have to help me." Friends should help according to the occasion. As the saying goes, it would be better to demolish 10 temples than ruin one marriage. This is a dishonorable thing not to do. What's more, as an outsider, he can't interfere in the Tang family's family affairs. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "You have to rely on yourself in this matter. How about you persuade your father? If you don't help me, I will tell Xiaoi that you touched me last time." As the saying goes, if a friend is in trouble, it is your duty to go to any extent for your friend, and you will go through fire and water, no matter what. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 116. Tang Ning didn't expect that Tang Yao Yao would be like this. She actually used this incident to threaten him. She said at the beginning that people who practice martial arts do not stick to trivial matters. They obviously touched her accidentally during a sparring session. How could he touch her himself? Does this woman still want her reputation? Even if she doesn't want it, Tang Ning still wants it? Okay, I promise you. Tang Ning nodded. After all, she was the one who took advantage. No matter how you put it, it was Tang Yaji who suffered the loss. He thought for a while and then said, "But, you also have to do something for me." After Tang Ning promised her, Tang Yao Yao was no longer so depressed, her expression was a little cheery and she said, "What's the matter, tell me." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "How many bars does your family have in Lingzhou?" "Yes, what's wrong?" "It would be great if the Tang family has a brewing workshop. He can provide them with brewing methods and specific details, and then discuss modifications with the brewing master. Although it is limited by technical conditions, it still cannot reach the standards of later generations, but the brewed wine, it is definitely better than the bamboo leaf green the old beggar drank." Brewing wine, Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, "Can I make money?" Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Remove that." He plans to enter the brewing industry, not only to retain the old beggar who is superb in martial arts, but also to make more money. There will be many places to use money in the future. He does not have a rich father like Tang Yajing. Find your own way to make money. Don't look for my father. Tang Yao Yao thought for a moment, shook her head, looked at him and said, "I'll do it with you." Tang Ning looked at her and asked uncertainly, "You?" "Yes, it's just the two of us." Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said firmly, "I still have a few thousand taels of pocket money, which should be enough. I can find a few more old people who have worked in the winery. Master, recruit some guys, we can brew it ourselves, and the money we make will be ours. My dad is good at it, if you ask him to cooperate, you can't make any money. People say that a married daughter throws away the water, and girls are outgoing, but it is rare to see a girl like Tang Yajing, whose elbows begin to turn outward before she is married." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Are you sure you can do it alone?" Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, "We will share the money earned equally." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "You paid for the majority of the money, and you also found the person. How can we share it equally? I won't take advantage of you, so I'll give you 3. Tang Yao Yao shook her head, "No, it's your idea. We'll split the money 50-50. Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "How about 4 or 6? Tang Yao Yao slapped her palm on the stone table and said dissatisfied, "You are not a man anymore, mother-in-law, I just like you to take advantage of me, what's wrong?" "What are you talking about, what are you taking advantage of?" Zhongyi and Su Aryu stood arm in arm at the door, looking at them and asked. Tang Ning turned around, walked forward, and explained, "I plan to do some business cooperation with Yao Yao. I will provide the secret recipe, and she will provide the money and effort. I will split the bill between 30 and 70 and she will get the majority. She insists on 50-50. We are all friends. We can't take advantage of her, well, that's it." Tang Yajiao spoke freely. Fortunately, he reacted quickly, otherwise the misunderstanding would have been huge. "Su Aryu asked doubtfully, what secret recipe? Brother Xiaoning, do you know the secret recipe?" "Why don't I know it?" "Of course you don't know. You were still young at that time. One summer, the weather was very hot, and an old man fainted at the entrance of the village. Zhongyi and Su Aryu expressed great sympathy for Tang Yao Yao's forced marriage. Especially Zhongyi, who has been victimized and can empathize with this matter, can understand her situation. Qing'er stood aside, thought for a while, and said, "Sister Yao Yao, you can also learn from my lady and throw hydrangeas to attract a bride. If you just throw a hydrangea randomly, you can hit a lucky man like Xiaoai, and the sky of Lingzhou city will be filled with hydrangeas." Tang Yao Yao glanced at Qing'er, but did not say these words. She stopped continuing the topic, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "Hurry up and write down the secret recipe. I'll have someone prepare it. We can start in 2 days. To make wine once, the complete process requires multiple fermentations. It takes nearly a year, not counting the storage period. Indeed, the sooner you start, the better." Tang Ning immediately hit it off with Tang Yejing about making money by brewing wine. Tang Ning took out pen and paper and wrote down everything in his memory. The final steps had to be finalized with the master brewer. Zhongyi and Su Ryu were on the side giving Tang Yaoyao advice, and Qing'er would interject from time to time. At the moon gate, Chen Yuxian looked inside, shook his head, and sighed softly. Ning'er has been gone for several months now. I don't know if I can come back. Zhou Mingli looked at her and said, if he can get the first grade, according to the convention, he will stay in the capital. If he is outside the first grade, it depends on where the officials will send him. But no matter what, he will officially take office. Before, there would be a half-year vacation, and he still had time to come back. Chen Yuxian looked at him and complained a little. Ning'er said he wouldn't take the exam at first, but you insist on letting him take the exam. Isn't it good for the whole family to be together? They haven't officially worshipped each other yet, and they have to be separated again this time. So long. Zhou Mingli shook his head and said, a good man has his ambitions in all directions, how can he not strive for progress and settle in a corner? No matter what the result of his provincial examination is, after this incident, the two of them must be settled. Chen Yuxian looked away from the yard and said, they are not in a hurry, but I am in a hurry to hold my grandson. It's time to make a decision. Zhou Mingli nodded, looked into the courtyard again, and asked, what should Miss Ryu do? Miss Xiru. Chen Yuxian looked over and saw Zhongyi and Suruhan smiling and saying something. After a pause, he sighed and said, let them handle the children's matters themselves. After saying that, she shook her head and walked away slowly. Zhou Mingli followed her, and when leaving, he looked into the courtyard. Only this time, his eyes stayed on Tang Yaoyao, who was discussing things with Tang Ning. Tang Ning has always been honest in business, unlike the old beggar who cut corners when selling secrets. 2 days later, he handed the old beggar a jar and a half of wine into his hand. The old beggar did not drink as much as Butcher Zheng. Instead, he carefully pulled out the stopper, took a small sip, closed his eyes and tasted it carefully. After a long time, he opened his eyes and praised, if it weren't for that the mellow aroma of this wine is not as good as that of bamboo leaf green, I almost thought it was Zhu Yeking from Daliang who appeared again. He took out another crumpled piece of paper from his arms, looked at Tang Ning, and said, I also have a set of internal skills and mental methods here. You can bring me a jar of this kind of wine in 2 days, and I will use this mental method. Give it to you. Tang Ning shook her head and said, I don't want mental tricks. This wine will cause trouble. This is the last time. The old beggar is addicted to alcohol. If you want to negotiate terms with him, you must first cut off his supply. No, the old beggar looked at him and said, this mental method and the secret book you bought from me complement each other. Without the mental method, the moves are just a showpiece. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? Tang Ning already knew that the old beggar was shameless, but she didn't expect him to be so shameless. He sold a secret book to himself 3 times. I wonder if his mentality this time is incomplete again? Seemingly seeing through his thoughts, the old beggar shook his head and said, don't worry, the formula this time is complete. I guarantee it with my personality. Tang Ning believed it just now, but now she doesn't. He thought for a while and then said, you sold me 3 secret books. The old beggar took out 2 more crumpled pieces of paper from his arms and said, 3 mental methods, 3 altars. He really has no personality. Even if he sells them in bundles, he actually sells the same goods separately. Tang Ning pondered for a long time, then reached out to take the pieces of paper and said, the secret books given by the seniors are priceless treasures. How can they be offset by a few jars of wine? So, as long as I am in Lingzhou, I will bring them to seniors every 3 days. How about a jar of this wine? That's what you said. The old beggar looked at him with wide eyes. He turned back to Butcher Zheng and said, "Pig killer, you bear witness for me." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "A gentleman's words are hard to follow. There are not many good people like you these days." The old beggar smacked his lips and said, "After drinking your wine, all the nectar will become as weak as water and lose its taste." "What are you talking about? Forget it." Tang Ning stretched out her hand and said, "Senior, if you don't believe me, you can high-five me as an oath." "Believe it, of course I believe it." The old beggar smiled and immediately stretched out his palm. Tang Ning stretched out her hand, clapped it with his dry wood-like palm, and said with a smile, "Then it's a deal." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 117. Although the old beggar was a bit cunning, he was not completely black-hearted. At least he did not sell him fake goods. Tang Ning threw all the secret books and mental methods to Tang Yao Yao. The meridians and acupuncture points were too difficult for him to understand. It was better to wait until she had practiced well and then teach him step by step. This was the most time-saving and labor-saving method. The winemaking workshop was ready. The Tang family had an idle workshop in Lingzhou, and even the rent was saved. He and Tang Yajing's business of making money had now officially entered the preparation stage. Although several winemaking masters were skeptical about the brewing method he provided, they were also looking forward to those new theories. After brewing wine for a lifetime, they also hoped to make some breakthroughs. After the preliminary preparations were done, the rest was a long wait. It should be around the end of next year when we can drink the first batch of new wine. By the time everything in the workshop was on track, it was already the middle of the 12th lunar month. At the beginning of the month, Lingzhou had a snowfall. Although it was not heavy, the temperature began to drop sharply after that. Uncle San's breakfast shop opened half an hour later in the morning, and the business of the shop was also affected. In the early morning of winter, few people were willing to come out early. It snowed again last night. Tang Ning got up in the morning, picked up a broom, and swept the thin layer of snow in the yard to the corner of the wall. After exercising for a while, there was a knock on the door. He opened the door, and Fang Xiaopang squeezed in from outside, handed a food box to Tang Ning, then put his hand to his mouth, blew a few breaths, and said, "I just bought it outside, eat it while it's hot." Tang Ning opened the food box, and the buns inside were still steaming. The weather was very cold. Although Fang Xiaopang's hands were frozen red, a layer of fine sweat beads appeared on his forehead. His hair was stuck to his temples. I don't know how many laps he had just run around the Fang mansion. In just 2 months, she has lost a lot of weight. Of course, compared with girls of ordinary age, she is still much fatter, but compared with her 2 months ago, it is a world of difference. Her perseverance and persistence greatly exceeded Tang Ning's expectations. Since the last assassination, the Fang family has been keeping a tighter watch on her. The number of guards around her has increased several times, and her time to go out has been restricted. She sat in the courtyard for a while, and Tang Ning sent her back. He carried 2 jars of wine in his hand. These days, he had promised the old beggar a jar every 3 days, and he had never stopped. Since the snow fell in the 12th month and the temperature dropped sharply, there have been fewer beggars on the streets. When it is cold in winter, they usually choose to hide in the ruined temples or caves outside the city to resist the wind and cold, but even so, there are still many beggars who freeze to death or starve to death in Lingzhou every winter. Lu Laoer used part of the start-up funds of the beggars' gang to gather the beggars in the city and built a shack outside the city. Although the shack is simple, it can shelter from the wind and rain. All beggars' gang disciples can live in it, and each person can get 2 bowls of white porridge and 2 steamed buns every day. The old beggar did not join the beggars' gang. The severe cold weather did not seem to have any effect on him. He looked even more energetic than before. When Tang Ning came over, he was sitting under the eaves of his uncle's shop and taking a nap. Before Tang Ning approached, his eyes suddenly opened, grinned, and said happily, It's an hour early today. Tang Ning handed him 2 jars of wine. After the old beggar took it, he was surprised and said, "Why are there 2 jars today? I'm so embarrassed." After that, he hid 1 jar behind his back, opened another jar, drank a sip quite intoxicatedly, and said, "It's so comfortable to drink this in such a cold day." Tang Ning looked at him and reminded him, "These 2 jars of wine, senior, drink sparingly, they will be gone after you finish them." "What?" The old beggar was shocked when he heard this, and looked at him and asked, "It will be gone after you finish drinking it, you won't send me any more in the future? You promised it at the beginning." The butcher can testify that scholars do not lie. "Do you want to go back on your word?" "That's a monk." "It's the same anyway. I said at the beginning that as long as I'm in Lingzhou, I can often send you wine like this." Tang Ning looked at him and explained, "But in half a month, I will leave Lingzhou and go to the capital, so I won't be able to send you wine anymore." Tang Ning originally planned to wait until the Lantern Festival before leaving, but it is said that this winter, several states have heavy snow and the roads are difficult to travel. In order to prevent delays, his father-in-law asked him to set off immediately after the new year. In total, he only has half a month left in Lingzhou. "Go to the capital." The old beggar put down the wine jar, looked at him and asked, "Why don't you stay in Lingzhou? Why go to the capital? Did your father-in-law get promoted?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "I'm going to the capital to take the exam." "What's good about being an official? You have to be tied up and look back and forth. It's better to be a beggar." The old beggar shook his head and said, looking at him and asked, "Where did you buy your wine?" "I didn't buy it." Tang Ning shook his head and said, "This is a secret that cannot be passed on. I promised others that I can't pass it on. But don't worry, old senior, Lingzhou will have new wine for sale in a year. It will be stronger and more mellow than the one I gave you. You just have to wait patiently." 1 year, the old beggar stared at him and asked, "What will I drink in this year?" Tang Ning looked at him and said in surprise, "What did you drink before, and what do you drink now? Isn't Genlubai not bad? I'm used to your wine. Now I'd rather drink water than nectar." The old beggar looked at him and suddenly said, "Why don't you sell me your secret technique? I'll trade it with you for the leg technique. There are boxing skills, and sword skills. Scholars don't lie and promise things to others, so how can they break their promises?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "Furthermore, this secret method involves business secrets and must not be passed on to others. Seniors, please bear with it for a year. If you have to endure it for a year, you might as well let me die." The old beggar scratched his messy hair. After thinking about it, he looked at Tang Ning and suddenly said, "I have a way. You don't have to sell me the secret method, I have wine to drink, the best of both worlds." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "What can we do?" The old beggar immediately said, "You go to the capital, and I will follow you to the capital. I don't want your secret method, so you can just give me a jar of wine every few days as you did before." Tang Ning looked embarrassed, "But I have to review my books and prepare for the provincial exam, so I'm afraid I won't have time." The old beggar followed up and said, "I'm not taking advantage of you for nothing. If you have any questions about martial arts, you can ask me. If I'm in a good mood, I'll teach you some unique moves. What do you think?" Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "I'll think about it." "What are you still thinking about?" "I don't know how many people in the martial arts want to get my advice, but I don't even look at them." The old beggar struck while the iron was hot and said quickly, "I promise that I will never disturb your study. Being addicted to anything is not a good thing. A generation of martial arts masters can break the bottom line just for the sake of wine. It's terrible." Tang Ning originally didn't want to go to such trouble, but she couldn't resist such an old man's pleading. After thinking for a long time, she nodded and reluctantly said, "Okay then." The old beggar immediately stretched out his palm, "High five." Tang Ning clapped his palms together, sighed, shook his head and left. The beautiful scenery of the West Lake, in March, the spring rain is like wine, and the willows are like smoke. When she returned to the house again, the depression on Tang Ning's face had long disappeared, and she walked into the courtyard humming a light tune. Tang Yao Yao was sitting at the stone table in the courtyard, her head lowered and her face sullen, obviously not in a good mood. Tang Ning stepped into the yard and withdrew her foot. At this time, the Tang fairy must not be provoked. It is best to hide as far away as possible. Return. Hearing the voice in her ear, Tang Ning retracted her foot and stepped in again. She walked to her side and asked, "What's wrong? Is your mind set wrong? I'll go find that old beggar." Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, "My father plans to agree to the Bai family's marriage proposal. Rich man Tang is not planning to marry his daughter this time, but to recruit a son-in-law. This Bai family is really willing to embrace the Tang family's lap. But it's normal to think about it. Rich man Tang only has such a precious daughter, and the Tang family's huge foundation will definitely be left to her in the end. Whoever marries her will not only get a fair-skinned, beautiful wife with long legs and a slim waist, but also a rich Tang family fortune. This kind of good thing is something that even Tang Ning can't control if she thinks about it. This is the real way to win Bai Fume, become CEO, reach the pinnacle of life casually, marry Miss Tang, and save a lifetime of struggle. Ordinary people will laugh out of their dreams when they encounter such a good thing." Tang Yao Yao looked up at him and asked, "Why are you laughing?" "It's nothing." Tang Ning shook her head, patted her chest, and promised, "Don't worry, your marriage will be taken care of by me." Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 118. Know yourself and your enemy, and you will win every battle. If you want to help Tang Yejing mess up this undecided marriage, you must first find out the details of the Bai family. Tang Yejing quickly helped him with this matter. Tang Ning held a piece of paper in his hand, on which was written the information of the Bai family in Lingzhou. The Bai family is also a merchant family in Lingzhou City. Although the family background is not as rich as the Tang family, it is also a wealthy family. Mr. Tang has always wanted Tang Yao Yao to become a talented woman like Zhong Yi, who is proficient in piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting, can write poems and lyrics, and is well educated and well mannered. However, the facts are slightly different from what he imagined. His daughter did not become a talented woman famous in Lingzhou, but became a chivalrous woman famous in Lingzhou. A difference of one word makes a difference of 1,000 miles. A talented woman will never have trouble getting married. If there is a rumor in Lingzhou City that a daughter of a certain family is well educated, gentle, and virtuous, and is not yet of marriageable age, the door of that family will be trampled by matchmakers. A chivalrous woman cannot marry. If others hear that the young lady is not well educated, gentle, and virtuous, but chivalrous and brave, and has unparalleled martial arts, no matchmaker will be willing to go to their house. Moreover, in this era, people pay attention to the matching of family status. A decent family will not marry the daughter of a merchant. Even a scholar with no backbone will not marry into a merchant's family. The Tang chivalrous woman is famous. Even if the family is also a merchant, they usually curry favor with the Tang family. When this matter is mentioned, the eldest brother is still unwilling. The Bai family intends to marry into the Tang family, only the second son of the Bai family. This is a real warrior, no, a warrior, and it is not ruled out that he may become a martyr. This matter has not been really settled. Tang Ning asked Lu Lao to send someone to pay attention to the movements of the second son of the Bai family. He found that he stayed at home most of the time, occasionally went out to meet and eat with friends, did not drink, did not visit prostitutes, and did not take a group of servants to swagger around the city and bully others. This made Tang Ning feel a little bit helpless. If the other party was a playboy or a scum, it would be fine. He could use all kinds of means without any pressure. As long as Tang Keizo could see the other party's true face, he would definitely not push his daughter into the fire pit. But who would have thought that the second son of the Bai family was a good boy, and his behavior could be regarded as a model of the second generation of rich people? He couldn't use dirty tricks on such a person. It seemed that he had to change his thinking. Tang Yao Yao stood aside, looked at him and asked, "Have you thought of a solution?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "Not yet." Tang Yao Yao took a deep breath, as if she had made a decision, and said, "If I can't think of a solution, I'll go out and hide for a while." Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Where can you hide? Do you have any relatives or friends outside Lingzhou?" No. Tang Yao Yao shook her head, and seemed to remember something, and looked at him and said, "Aren't you going to the capital soon? I'll follow you, so that you won't encounter bandits on the road and you won't even be able to reach the capital." Even if he encountered bandits on the road, there was still the old beggar. What kind of bandits he couldn't deal with? Why did he bring Tang Yejing with him? Besides, he could escape for a while, but not for a lifetime. What if the rich man Tang thought that the two of them eloped? Wouldn't he be unable to clear himself even if he jumped into the Yellow River? Thinking of this, Tang Ning looked at her and said, "I have thought of a solution. A restaurant somewhere in Lingzhou." In a private room, a man looked at the young man beside him and asked, "Brother Bai, you said that your marriage is about to be decided. The rich Tang family has only one daughter. The Tang family is rich and powerful. After the rich Tang dies, the foundation of the Tang family will fall into your hands. Why are you still frowning?" Bai Che sighed and drank the wine in the glass, but said nothing. The man was stunned and asked, "Is the young lady of the Tang family ugly?" Before Bai Che could speak, another young man beside him shook his head and said, "Brother Kong, you just came to Lingzhou, and you don't know that the daughter of the Tang family is a top beauty in Lingzhou city. I really don't know how a man like Mr. Tang could give birth to such a beautiful daughter." Brother Kong was even more surprised when he heard this and asked, "Since the daughter of the Tang family is so beautiful and the Tang family has such a family business, why is Brother Bai unhappy?" The young man shook his head again and said, "Brother Kong, you don't know that this Miss Tang is very famous in Lingzhou." After listening to this, the man surnamed Kong pursed his lips, looked at Bai Che, and comforted him, "Brother Bai, you don't have to worry. Maybe the rumor is wrong. How could there be such a woman?" Another young man looked at Bai Che and echoed, "Yes, you don't have to worry too much. Rumors are always untrue. In my opinion, it is much better for you to go to the Tang family than to stay in the Bai family. After all, the Bai family will be inherited by your brother in the future, but the Tang family is different." "I hope so." Bai Che nodded a little depressed, stood up, and said, "Have you finished eating? Let's go back after you finish eating." The three of them walked out of the restaurant, and the beggar squatting in a corner of the street also stood up. They looked at each other, and one of them immediately walked quickly towards the crowd. "Thank you for your hospitality, Brother Bai." At the entrance of the restaurant, the young man surnamed Kong waved to Bai Che and said, "I will leave Lingzhou in a few days, so I can only congratulate Brother Bai in advance." Thinking of the words of comfort from the two just now, Bai Che felt a little better in his heart, and forced a smile on his face, saying, "Brother Kong, you are polite. Catch the thief, catch the thief." Just as the three were about to leave, there was a sudden noise on the street. A figure ran from the front, looking panicked, knocking down many pedestrians along the way. Behind, two constables were chasing quickly. The figure ran quickly past the three people, and when he continued to run forward, a white shadow suddenly flashed in front of him. Bang! After a muffled sound, his body flew sideways and flew to an alley on the side of the street. The woman in white clapped her hands and walked into the alley. Soon, a series of ping-pong sounds came from the alley. You have hands and feet, why do you steal? I hate people like you who get something for nothing. Don't show up in front of me anymore, or I'll beat you up every time I see you. The two constables finally arrived, trotted over, and said anxiously, Girl, stop beating me, or someone will die. You are constables, but you can't even catch a little thief. The woman glanced at them, walked out of the alley, walked to the street, and saw Bai Che and the other two standing in the middle of the road. She frowned and said, What are you looking at? Get out of the way, you are blocking my way. Bai Che looked at the woman, his face turned pale, and he stood there in a daze. The two people beside him saw her kick the little thief away with one kick, and they trembled in their hearts. They immediately pulled him away and said hurriedly, I'm sorry. The woman glared at them, and then strode away. At this time, the two constables had already carried the thief out of the alley. The three of them took a look at the thief and gasped. The man's eyes rolled back, his face was covered in blood, he was foaming at the mouth, and his whole body was twitching unconsciously. It was not until the detectives carried him away that the two people beside Bai Che came back to their senses. The man surnamed Kong said with some fear, Who is that woman? She is so fierce. The young man wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and murmured, As a woman, this is outrageous. I can guarantee that this woman will never get married. Whoever marries her will be unlucky for 8 lifetimes. After the two finished speaking, they realized that Bai Che beside them did not speak. They turned their heads at the same time and found that his forehead was covered with cold sweat, his face was extremely pale, and his body was still shaking slightly. The two were shocked and spoke quickly. Brother Bai, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell? What's wrong? We'll take you to see a doctor. In the backyard of Uncle San's breakfast shop, Tang Ning fetched a basin of water. Ren Pingsheng took out the cloth pillow on his stomach, washed off the paint on his face, and rinsed his mouth with a bowl. He wiped off the remaining soybean milk from the corners of his mouth. Then he looked at Tang Ning and asked, Boss, was my performance okay? Tang Ning nodded and said, Very good. Ren Pingsheng stuffed a bun in his mouth, rubbed his shoulders, and said, I think my performance was a bit exaggerated. I wanted to show a feeling of dying after being beaten, but Miss Tang's kick was too painful. It hurt so much that I couldn't control my expression accurately. Remember to ask her to kick more gently next time. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 119. Tang Mansion. Mr. Tang took a sip of tea, then put the cup heavily on the table, looked at a middle-aged man below, and said lightly, Old Bai, I didn't hear what you said just now, please say it again. The middle-aged man's forehead was full of cold sweat, and he didn't dare to wipe it. He lowered his head and said, Tang, shopkeeper Tang, let's forget about the marriage between our two families. Mr. Tang stood up, looked at him, and said, It was you who proposed marriage a few days ago, and it is you who regretted it today. Mr. Bai, are you kidding me? When he said the last sentence, his voice suddenly sank. The middle-aged man shuddered, looked at the wealthy Tang, and immediately said, Don't misunderstand, shopkeeper Tang, it's just that my child can't do anything, and I really don't dare to delay your daughter. Can't do anything, the wealthy Tang looked at him and asked, Why didn't you say it before? The middle-aged man hurriedly explained, saying, My child was injured last night. The doctor said that he might not be able to do anything in the future. I really don't dare to delay Miss Tang, shopkeeper Tang, you see this. The wealthy Tang pondered for a moment and nodded. In this case, let's forget it. Thank you, shopkeeper Tang. The middle-aged man hurriedly bowed his hands to thank him, raised his head and said, then I'll leave first. The wealthy Tang waved his hand and said, let's go. When he walked out of the Tang mansion, the head of the Bai family breathed a sigh of relief, and his bent spine straightened up again. Although the Bai family has some family property, compared with the Tang family, it can only be regarded as a small family. He was unwilling to offend the Tang family. If the rich man Tang was unhappy, the Bai family would be eliminated from the list of merchants in Lingzhou. But the youngest son is still a son. Yesterday, he hugged his thigh, cried and made a scene, and refused to marry the daughter of the Tang family. As a father, he couldn't just watch him die. Although the inhumane reason sounds embarrassing, fortunately, only the Tang family and the Bai family know about it, and it won't prevent him from getting married in the future. If the rich man Tang asks about it, he will say that he has been cured. The head of the Bai family breathed a sigh of relief again and stepped into the sedan chair. At the Tang mansion, Mr. Tang walked out of the door and told the housekeeper, Yao Yao is gentle and virtuous, and is suitable for marriage. The reason why our Tang family does not marry the Bai family is because the second son of the Bai family is inhumane, not because my daughter cannot get married. Do you understand? The housekeeper bowed and nodded, saying, don't worry, master, everyone will know. Mr. Tang looked at him with satisfaction, and added, if the Bai family dares to spread any rumors, let them all go back to the countryside to farm. The housekeeper bowed his head and said, understood. Mr. Tang nodded, walked through the corridor, and walked towards a courtyard in the mansion. In the courtyard, Tang Yao Yao danced with a long sword tightly. When she saw Tang Keizo coming in, she put away the sword and whispered, Dad. Tang Keizo looked at her and asked, did you do it? Tang Yao Yao curled her lips and asked, what do you mean I did it? Tang Keizo glanced at her and said, the head of the Bai family just came and cancelled the marriage between the two families. Tang Yao Yao sat on the stone bench and said indifferently, cancel it? Do you know that apart from the Bai family, there are not many families willing to marry into my Tang family? If you do this, how can you get married in the future? Tang Keizo walked over, looked at her, frowned and said, you disappoint me so much. You disappoint me. Tang Yao Yao turned her head and looked at him, tears in her eyes, and said, before my mother died, she asked you to take good care of me and not let me be sad. Is this how you take care of me? When you did these things, did you ask me? Tang Keshan was stunned, opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. After a long time, he shook his head, sat opposite her, and sighed, Yao, Dad is old and can't take care of you for much longer. Dad wants to find someone who can take care of you instead of Dad, so that you won't be bullied. Who said you are old? Tang Yao Yao rubbed her eyes, looked at him and said, and I can take care of myself. Who in Lingzhou can bully me? Tang Keizo looked at her, shook his head helplessly, and said, okay, since you don't want to, Dad will never urge you again. If you have a favorite, tell Dad, Dad will ask someone to find you a marriage. If he doesn't agree, Dad will use money to make him agree. Okay, I don't have a favorite. Tang Yao Yao walked behind him, pinched his shoulders, and said, I don't want you to take care of me either. You took care of me before, and now it's my turn to take care of you. The father and daughter talked for a while, and Tang Keizo looked at her helplessly, shook his head, and got up and left. Tang Yao Yao stood in the yard, waved to her maid, and said, Xiu'er, go see if my father has left. Xiu'er ran out of the door, looked, and then ran back and said, he's gone. Tang Yao Yao nodded, walked to the bottom of the courtyard wall, tapped her toes, and jumped onto the courtyard wall. At the gate of the courtyard, the figure of Tang Keshan appeared again with his hands behind his back, looking in the direction of the courtyard wall, with a thoughtful expression. Tang Ning looked at Tang Yao Yao, who had just fallen from the sky, and asked, "Did the Bai family really come to break the contract?" Tang Yao Yao was very happy and said, "My father just told me personally, how could it be false?" "That's good." Tang Ning nodded, stretched out his palm, and said, "Congratulations." Pa. Tang Yao Yao reached out and slapped his palm, saying, "Thank you." Tang Ning thought for a moment and asked, "Now that the Bai family's affairs are settled, won't a few more Red, Huang, and Lan families appear?" Tang Yao Yao shook her head and said, "My father said that he won't force me anymore. I'll make my own decision on my marriage." Qing stood aside, thought for a moment, and said, "But Sister Yao Yao, it's so hard to find a Bai family willing to marry you. Now you've scared the young master of the Bai family. If the news gets out, no one in Lingzhou will be willing to marry you. It's useless for you to make your own decision. Even if you are willing to marry, if no one is willing to marry you, you still can't get married." When Qing noticed that the atmosphere was a little wrong, she began to move towards the door. But with her small arms and legs, how could she be faster than the long-legged and extremely agile Tang Yejing? Almost the moment she reacted and ran out of the door, she was caught by Tang Yao Yao. Caught, she was beaten. Tang Yejing carried her into the room, threw her on the bed, and spanked her on the buttocks. The sound was extremely crisp. Tang Ning leaned against the door, resisting the urge to help Tang Yejing beat her. This is retribution. Good and evil will eventually be rewarded. Heaven will have its own way. If you don't believe it, look up and see who will be spared by heaven. Although he couldn't get back the humiliation he suffered from Qing, he still felt an inexplicable excitement when he saw Tang Yejing spanking Qing on the bed. Although it sounds a bit perverted, it is really exciting, and there is also a pleasure of revenge. Tang Ning sat at the table, poured a cup of tea, and took a sip to moisten his throat. Tang Yejing had let go of Qing and sat opposite him. Qing is right, she thought for a while and said, "Although the Bai family cancelled the marriage proposal, I am destroying my image. How can I get married in the future?" Tang Ning took a sip of tea and didn't speak. "What is self-destruction? Her image is like this. Comrade Xiao Ren is the one who is acting. She is acting in her true colors. If everyone knows that I like to beat people, how can I get married?" Tang Yao Yao looked at him, thought for a while, and suddenly said, "If I can't get married, it's all your fault. You have to take responsibility." Poof. Tang Ning spit out all the tea without leaving a drop. What is crossing the river and destroying the bridge? What is killing the donkey after it has done its job? Tang Yejing has made the most profound interpretation of this. Tang Yao Yao wiped her face expressionlessly, and when she looked at him, her eyes gradually became murderous. Qing poured herself a cup of tea, moistened her lips, rubbed her butt, and leaned against the door to watch Tang Ning being chased by Tang Yao Yao all over the yard. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 120. Tang Yejing's marriage was ruined by herself. In the past, the people of Lingzhou knew that the daughter of the Tang family was different from other young ladies. She didn't like poetry and songs, but only liked swords and spears. Now they also know that the daughter of the Tang family is very violent. She caught a thief who stole 10 cents and almost beat him to death. That day, the thief's face was covered with blood, his eyes rolled back, and he foamed at the mouth. Many people on the street saw it. It was really shocking. Of course, the inhumane behavior of the second son of the Bai family has also become the gossip in Lingzhou city in recent days. Tang Ning didn't know whether the Bai family was affected, but since then, no matchmaker has come to the Tang family. Tang Yejing didn't care about it at all. She was lively every day, and her movements of climbing over the wall became more skillful and varied. When she understood the several sets of mental methods, taught him and told him to practice diligently after leaving Lingzhou, Tang Ning realized that tomorrow was New Year's Eve. He brought a jar of wine and handed it to the old beggar again, looking at him and said, "Senior, please prepare yourself. We will set off in 2 days. I only bring a wine gourd." "There is nothing to prepare." The old beggar took the jar of wine and said apologetically, "I am so sorry. I have to trouble you on the way." "No trouble." Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "I have not repaid you for the secret book. This is what I should do." Although the third uncle did not know why Tang Ning took the old beggar with him to the capital, he knew that Tang Ning must have his intentions, and his attitude towards the old beggar became better. The direct expression was to give him a tray of buns for free every day. Uncle San patted his shoulder and said, "Do your best in the exam. When you come back with the top scorer, I will change the name of the shop to Top Scholar Baizai Shop and the business will be good." Aunt San rolled her eyes at him and said, "Look at how capable you are. You still call it Top Scholar Baizai Shop. It was Xiao Ning who got the top scorer, not you. Why are you so proud?" Uncle San curled his lips and said, "We are all family. Why do we care about these things?" Tang Ning smiled and looked at them and said, "Tomorrow is New Year's Eve. Uncle San and Aunt San should come over tonight. Let's get together and have some fun. Tomorrow is New Year's Eve, and the emphasis is on a reunion." Xiao Ru was forced to stay at home by her mother-in-law, so only Uncle San and Aunt San were left. When Tang Ning came out, her mother-in-law specifically told him to invite Uncle San and Aunt San to come over tomorrow night. "Okay," Uncle San nodded happily, turned to look at Zheng the butcher and said, "Old Zheng, remember to save a few pounds of lean meat tomorrow, pure lean, fresh, for making dumplings." Zheng the butcher waved his hand and said, "I'll save it for you, remember to come and get it before tonight." Tang Ning looked at the old beggar again and said, "Senior, tomorrow night you." The old beggar waved his hand and said, "I won't join in the fun, tomorrow night I will spend it with Lu Laoer and the others." Because of Tang Ning, Lu Laoer and the others are now respectful to the old beggar. In the beggar's sect, he has become the first person under Tang Ning. A few days ago, he taught Lu Laoer and the others a set of joint attack techniques, which can be practiced by 4 to 10 beggars. It is said that after practicing proficiently, 10 people can form a formation and deal with ordinary small masters. This was exactly what Tang Ning wanted. Although the beggars sect had many people and could win a fight by sheer numbers, it would be difficult to manage if it was always just a mob, and it would not be able to accomplish anything. He had already told Lu Laoer not to recruit all the beggars at once, but to set rules for them. The beggars sect did not want lazy people who were lazy and did not know the rules, nor did it want troublemakers who did not know the rules. Ren Pingsheng, as Lu Laoer's assistant, was not only a great actor, but also had a higher level of thinking than ordinary beggars. Tang Ning entrusted him with the important task of unifying thoughts and helping the beggars sect disciples establish a correct outlook on life and values. By now, most of the beggars in Lingzhou city had been recruited by them. After this year, they would gradually expand outside the city. This was Tang Ning's first year in this world. After today, he would stay in Lingzhou for at most 2 more days before setting off for the capital. Before night, the mansion was already decorated with lights and colorful decorations, and the maids and servants were busy going back and forth. Fairy Tang is also spending New Year's Eve at the Zhone mansion tonight. Before Tang Ning came here, this was already an annual tradition for the Tang and Zhone families. Father-in-law and Mr. Tang were playing chess in the study. Tang Ning only found out today that Mr. Tang, although he looked like a nouveau riche, seemed to have studied before. Later, for some reason, he gave up studying and went into business. In less than 20 years, he built up the current family business of the Tang family. In the study, Tang Ji placed a chess piece and asked casually, "When will your son-in-law leave?" "In 2 days," Zhone Mingli replied. After placing the piece, he took a sip of tea while Tang Ji was thinking and asked casually, Has Yao Yao's marriage not been decided yet? Tang Keizu shook his head and said, never mind, let her decide Yao Yao's marriage herself. Zhou Mingli put down the teacup and said, I know you love her, but marriage has always been decided by parents and matchmakers since ancient times. Yao Yao is not young anymore. If you, as a father, don't think about her, how can you expect others to think about her? Tang Keizu smiled and stopped talking about this topic. He said, your son-in-law is a state champion and was awarded by His Majesty himself. This time he goes to Beijing, he will definitely pass the imperial examination, right? Zhou Mingli nodded and said, the provincial examination has not started yet, and the results are not expected, but I know his ability very well. It is not a big problem to get a jinchi. Rich man Tang looked at him and asked, so, after he leaves this time, it is unlikely that he will return to Lingzhou. Zhou Mingli shook his head and said, even if he is awarded an official, he will have a long enough vacation. He can come back and stay for at least half a year. That's it? Mr. Tang's face looked a little disappointed and he waved his hand, stop talking about this, let's play chess. Zhou Mingli dropped another chess piece and asked, what do you think about Yao Yao's marriage? Today, my mother-in-law cooks by herself, and my third aunt and the cook are in the kitchen helping her prepare the ingredients for the evening. Su Aryu and Zhonyi were outside making dumplings, while Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao were helping. Although Tang Yao Yao was not good at cooking, her hands-on skills were not limited. Among the others, she made the most beautiful dumplings. This was probably the most lively New Year's Eve that Tang Ning had ever had in her entire life. At a large table, Chen Yuxian looked at everyone and said with a smile, we are all one family, you are welcome tonight. Tang Ning knew that her mother-in-law liked to have fun, and what she cared about the most on weekdays was whether her father-in-law would come back for dinner. This kind of happy reunion scene was her favorite. Sooner or later, Xiao Aryu will become a family, so it's okay to say so. Forget about Tang Yejing, whoever is a family with her will never have peace in his life. After New Year's Eve, people generally didn't go out on the first day of the new year. Tang Ning spent a day with Zhonyi and Su Aryu at home. On the second day of the second year, their mother-in-law took them to the temple to offer incense and pray for blessings, and he accompanied them throughout the whole process. The third day of the new year was the day he set off. This trip to the capital was accompanied by Peng Chen in addition to the old beggar. Ever since he accidentally saw the old beggar show his hand, Peng Chen had no objections to this business trip. Zhou Mingli was exhorting Peng Chen, and Chen Yuxian stepped forward and told Tang Ning, be careful when going out, try to take the official road, stay in a hotel at night, and be careful. When you arrive in the capital, write home immediately. Letter. Tang Ning smiled and said, don't worry, mother, I understand. Chen Yuxian nodded, looked at Zhonyi and Su Aryu again, turned and backed away. Zhonyi looked at him with some worry in his eyes and said softly, be careful along the way. Su Aryu handed him a bag and said, brother Xiaoning, I've packed the clothes and things you'll need on the road and put them in it. Tang Ning looked at them, took their hands, held them together, and said, wait for my good news. Fang Xiaopang ran over from behind. The two women's faces turned red and they immediately let go of his hands. Fang Xiaopang put a big baggage into his hand and said, take these with you and eat them on the way. The burden was bigger than what Su Aryu packed. Tang Ning looked at her and touched her head. The fat Fang in front of him was no longer the chubby girl who fought with him for the last piece of cake. Tang Yao Yao was the last one to step forward, took out a sign from her arms and threw it to him, saying, our family also has a shop in the capital. No matter what happens, you can go to them with this sign. After she finished speaking, she took another step forward and whispered, when you go to the capital, you have to control yourself and don't mess around with others, I said this for the two of them. Tang Ning glanced at her and whispered, do I look like a philanderer? Tang Yao Yao nodded, like. It's true that the princess is not in a hurry, but the palace maid is. Tang Ning looked at her, then turned to look at everyone, and waved her hand, let's go. Goodbye, Fang Xiaopang waved to him vigorously. Tang Ning opened the car curtain and looked in a certain direction until those figures completely disappeared from his sight. He lowered the car curtain, sighed, and murmured, the capital.